Well, a very good evening to you. In case you're joining us right now, you're just in time for the big conversation surrounding the Kisumu Malaba SGR extension, which was launched by President William Ruto and his Ugandan counterpart Yoweri Museveni, I think 3 days ago. Now, the question we asked this particular evening is this a game changer or a costly gamble? With me are four guests this particular evening, and allow me to introduce them to my next to me is Mr. Edgar Odari. Very good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
Next to Mr. Odari is Honorable Peter Orero. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Thank you for making time.
Thank you too.
Next to Honorable Orero is Mr. Leonard. Is it Khafafa or Afafa?
Khafafa.
Khafafa.
Yes.
Thank you. Leonard Khafafa is also joining us this particular evening. And of course, last but not least is Dismas Mokua, who is an economist. Allow me to begin with you, Mr. Mokua. Now, the big question here is this particular project an investment or a costly gamble?
In my view, as you've indicated, it's a game changer. But first of all, I'm very happy to be in this panel and with the Orero, among the few members of the National Assembly who are reassured of an election. Now, when you talk about...
Why is he reassured?
I mean, it's done very well in his constituency. If you go to Kibera, if you meet with his voters, they're very happy with the work he has done. And I guess that is the reason why he has guts to come on air. He should be in a fire ground, campaigning or buying people lunch.
Labda pia, labda ako kadi. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, although I don't know the meaning of what to kokadi. But when you look at this SGR, you look at it from an economic perspective as well as a political perspective, it's a game changer. Maybe we start from a political perspective. For people who come from Western Kenya, and you can talk about the Luos, Kisis, and Luyas, they've been marginalized since independence when it comes to infrastructure. When I have conversations with elected members across Kenya, a number of them, especially from from the session paper, the one of Tom Boyer, number 10, there were places which were described as high potential areas. And I understand some members, elected members of the National Assembly, actually all elected leaders in that part of the world, they struggle to get a road to tarmac because everything has already been done. But in parts of Western Kenya, every road needs a tarmac. So when the broad-based administration comes up with this kind of projects, people break into a dance and song. You may recall not a long time ago, people in parts of Western Kenya, they broke into a dance and song when they saw a transformer. And then folks in Nairobi were saying, wait a minute, I mean, you guys are installing a transformer and you're breaking into a dance and song? It's because these people have not seen power in their entire life. And this points out to the strategy which has been deployed by Broad-Based to make sure that there is equity and equality in the distribution of national resources. So when you talk about the roads, when you talk about this SGR, people are very excited, people are dancing to the bank. And this would have not happened without Mr. Raila Odinga, who gave President Ruto political insurance to take some of these decisions, which would potentially cost him. And of course, the CS for the National Treasury, Mr. Badi, has done a very good job in ensuring that there is equity and equality in the distribution of the national resources. Now, the fact that President Museveni attended this thing, and the people would recall that President Museveni has got a very solid understanding of political science, economics, and the East African integration process. So the fact that he came to witness this thing, in my view, it's something that we need to, we need to be very happy and excited. But having these SGR and having these facilities alone is not a sufficient proposition. We need to have very solid leaders who will now assist people take advantage of the opportunities created. Because there's a very high chance you can have these, all these facilities and people can use the facilities to dry maize. You know, there's some parts in Kenya where there's a tarmac which is used to dry maize. I don't know that you are alive to that fact. So if you don't have leaders who are very proactive, then some of these facilities may not add any value.
Okay, fair enough. Coming to Mr. Leonard, I don't know whether you agree with Mr. Mokua that indeed this is a game changer. But again, when you look at the cost, because there's always that concern regarding the cost, even if you look at the first one of the SGR.
Well, costs.
The question of cost is still up in the air. We don't know for sure how much the total cost will be eventually. We do have figures, though, that have been floated around, I think to the tune of about 500 to 700 billion thereabouts, which is more or less reflective of what the SGR ought to cost. But I want to piggyback on what he said, in support of what he said, that this is going to be of great benefit to the people of Kenya, especially Western Kenya. And I want to look at it in terms of numbers, because I'm a numbers person. I like crunching numbers. So you look at the number of passengers that each freight train can potentially carry, which is about 1,096 passengers per freight train. If you look at it in terms of the numbers of buses that are removed from the road, that's about 17 to 20 buses that are removed from the road. You look at the freight train, the passenger train. Now you look at the freight train in terms of the amount of tonnage it can carry, which is about 4,000 tons. And if you compare it to a 40-foot container on a lorry, that's about roughly about 1,428 lorries removed from the road as a result of the SGR. You know, if you come from that part of the country, you will know that the road trip to any part of Western Kenya is untenable at the moment. There is congestion, and sometimes it takes even up to 24 hours to do that distance from here, say, to Kisumu, or from here to Eldoret, or from here to Malaba. It can take you up to 24 hours. With the removal of these buses, with the removal of these trucks on the road, that trip ought to be a lot more easier. Then, again, the benefits of this SGR, faster movement, of course, of goods and passengers, as we've said. There's also the promotion of regional connectivity, because the SGR is not just going to be limited to Kenya, Kisumu, or Malaba. It's going to extend onward to Kampala. So in past times, by the way, in fact, talking of trains, in past times, trains actually used to bring people all the way from Uganda to Nairobi, Uganda, Eldoret, and Uganda to Kisumu and other towns within the country, when we were the old East African community. So I foresee that scenario coming back, where there'll be easy movement of people within the region, within the EAC, leading to greater integration.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, leading to greater integration, leading to greater connectivity.
Okay, before I, involve Honorable Rero, you've talked about, trucks and even 17 buses, to quote the exact number you've said, removal of this, but the question is, these buses, they're people employed. How do we balance to ensure that?
The SGR itself is an employer. It's a big employer. Even starting from the construction itself, because it is said that anecdotal evidence suggests that about 65,000 jobs will be created by the SGR, by the building of the SGR by itself. Then, of course, you have the attendant infrastructure around the SGR that requires manpower to run. You have the trains themselves, you have the maintenance of the trains, those are engineers, you have drivers, you have conductors on board the train, you have all those stations. I think there are multiple stations along that entire track that will have to be manned, will have to be serviced.
But the question would be, that does not necessarily translate to those who are operating or working in these buses or, in the road transport, getting those jobs.
The nature abhors a vacuum. The moment a vacuum is created, say in that transport sector, nature will fill it up somehow. These people will always find some place or the other to direct their energies or to direct their unique expertise. It's not going to be all lost.
Yeah. So just to buttress his point, you cannot stop the construction of SGR simply because people with trucks or buses are going to lose employment opportunities.
It was not about stopping, Mr. Mokwe. It was about balancing. Yes. But let me engage Honorable Rero. Honorable Rero, the figure, like Mr. Leonard has said, is around between 500 billion to, I think, actually around 650 billion. Where is this money coming from?
Of course, one of the sources of money is maybe to get to borrow externally, but also we have a national infrastructural fund, national
infrastructure fund.
Yes.
Okay.
But let us look at borrowing. When you borrow, we have consumptive debt, and then we also have the debts that we use not to pay for salaries, but the debt that we use to build, like roads. It is called productive debts. So those are two kinds of debts. What we need to look at, do we have these debts as consumptive debts? Are we going to use it to pay salaries? Are we going to use it to build the SGR and other things? Now, if we are going to use it to build the SGR, one thing is that this has long-term revenue collection. And two, it will help create economic zones along the railway. Now, three, you can securitize the income from the railway, so that what we get from the railway, the SGR, can be used to pay these debts. So it is going to be how are we planning to pay the debts? So, and what is the alternative? Suppose we say it is 500 billion. What alternative do we have when we are saying it is too much? One, if we don't use it, we are going to lose what is called trade routes in this country. Remember, in East Africa, Uganda, they have started building their SGR. Tanzania are also doing Central Corridor. So if we don't do it, what guarantee do we have that we are still going to be the real economic hub of East Africa? So we are risking losing that kind of stature if we are not going to use this. And this is repayable within a period of time. And really, when we look at this SGR, imagine that it ended in Naivasha. What happens from Mombasa Port, Maritime Port to Naivasha? When it reaches there, you offload the cargoes and the goods. What is the cost, economic cost of doing that, and now using the other means? So it is better that we have it from Mombasa all the way to Malaba and across to Busia. So that along here, we have, now we are creating more economic zones for our people.
Okay, fair enough. You've talked about, probably getting more loans. As it stands, we pay around 129 billion annually to service the Chinese debt. Most of it, by the way, being tied to the railway project. Now, according to statistics again, the SGR last year generated around 21.3 billion Kenya shillings, despite growth in cargo and the number of passengers. If you compare that with the amount of money that we pay in terms of debt repayment, it is relatively low. One would wonder, if we go for another loan yet again, are we not overburdening the taxpayer?
I think for my statement, I said that this money, when we securitize the money, the money received is going to be used to repay the loans. And two, we are going to have long-term results-oriented collection of revenue that will help to pay this loan. And again, can you tell me any first world country that has not developed SGR? When we were colonized, the first thing that these people did for Kenyan is to build the SGR, to build the railway. And during that time, I remember when we still had East Africa, you could travel all the way from Kenya to Uganda or all the way from Mombasa to Kisumu using the railway line. So for any developed country, for a country to develop, you must always invest in SGR. Electrical SGR, go to US, go to UK, go to any of these developed countries. So for Kenya to be, as now we are saying that we want to be like Singapore, for us to reach there, one of the things that we must do, the first thing is infrastructure. Second, infrastructure. And the third is infrastructure. And that is one of the ways to be where we want to be. So I don't think that because now we are servicing loans, we cannot do another which is going to help us improve the economic status of this country. So I think this is one of the ways that we must make hard decisions, that it is either now or not there. And we must do it now during our lifetime. So it is a good idea that we must invest in this SGR and also to open up some of the regions that have not been opened up.
Fair enough.
Can I just add to what Mheshimiwa said?
30 seconds before.
Yeah, 30 seconds. John Buddy has been very creative in terms of funding. He's avoiding high-cost external debt by securitization. Securitization has been done of the railway development levy. It's a collection that is ongoing. So you securitize that and you use that to fund the SGR. And that's about 30% of the funding that is going to be used for the SGR.
We'll come to also the issue of the railway development levy a bit later on. But Mr. Odari, allow me to engage you. I mean, how should Kenyans think of the trade-off between infrastructure today and, of course, the fiscal pressure tomorrow?
It's interesting because we usually like talking so much about trade and investment, and not much attention is paid to behind the border issues such as infrastructure. So it's a question of, so let me give you an example. The railway has currently been utilizing about 16% cargo capacity against an estimated capacity that was put at 48%. That was because we were leaving this train in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in Suswa. There's no way you'll tell me an importer will come and take the cargo all the way to Suswa and then now start getting another truck to pick the thing from Suswa and now take it all the way to the border. So this is going to open up. And it's important because it's going to open up regional trade in the sense that you will now have a train that runs all the way from Mombasa to the border post of Malaba, after which then the train continues from the Uganda side. And that's important. So I think the trade-off we are making is that, yes, it's 600 billion is significant given the kind of debt we already have. But like he said, 2.5 railway development levy is being securitized to cover part of that. But then if you really look at it in terms of long term, it's going to open up the region and it's going to improve trade and investment within this region that's going to pass through. And that's a good trade-off if you think about it. Yeah. Now, the other thing I wish to say is that, yes, you have challenges in terms of the way debt has been soaked up into this entire enterprise. But if you really think about it, there are some trade-offs that we can be able to make that will be able to make this successful. So take an example of, it goes all the way to Kisumu, but beyond Kisumu, there's the trade to Mwanza, to, Musoma? All those places that are surrounding Lake Victoria. So it's going to also increase the hinterland and open up trade in those routes. Yes.
Now, in regards to opening, and even the East African region as a whole, Mr. Odari, before I go back to Mr. Dismas, Uganda is also part of this process.
Yes.
Now, how much success of this particular project is dependent on what happens in Uganda? What if there's delay in terms of the process of the project being finalized in Uganda? How does it affect the
Even
success
if there's delay in terms of the project being done in Uganda, it will be a win in terms of, first of all, the freight traffic will increase from at least 16%. I don't know if it will get to 48%, but it will be significant from 16% because it will make sense for exporters to say, let me take my cargo from Mombasa to Malaba and then get a truck from Malaba going all the way to the Ugandan circuit. That's cheaper than say, let me run the entire course of the Mombasa-Malaba highway.
But Mr. Makwa, let me come to you. What will that mean for the Kenyan man or Kenyan person economically? Because if there's delay on the other end, then there must be some economic impact in a way.
Well, in my view, if there's delay in Uganda or Rwanda or Burundi or even DRC, that is not material. Because as Edgar has indicated, the international traders will get their cargo from from Mombasa all the way to Malaba. And now they deal with it from Malaba. It's actually their own business. But now you have the commitment from President Museveni that is going to open up. And you cannot talk about regional integration if you don't have a key asset like this railway line structured in a manner that makes businesses to be very competitive. You recall that's what President Museveni indicated, that is going to reduce the cost of doing business. Now, when it reduces the cost of doing business, it means that the entire region becomes very competitive. And even outside those other parts of the world, the Musalia Mudavadi has been very keen on economic and commercial diplomacy, making and positioning Kenya as an FDI destination. So these are the kind of facilities you need in Kenya so that you can make Kenya a productive economy. You know, for a long time we've been told that if you want to take advantage of the benefits of globalization, the marketing and production, you need to make Kenya competitive. This SGR is part of the infrastructure that is going to make us competitive. Like, for instance, the people from the western part of Kenya, if they have cows, goat, sheep, whatever they want to export, it's not going to be very easy because you will have a structured way of doing it. And in my view, these are the kind of projects we need to encourage. Even if initially they appear like maybe the net present value is going to be maybe negative, still it's got a very huge impact. And in my view, the only missing link we are going to have is leaders who will make sure that they harness the factors of production and make people very competitive. Because, it may not make sense just to have the railway line if you don't have leaders who are able to mobilize the community. And one would expect that a number of governors in all these places where the railway line is passing, right now they've started mobilizing people. Like, for instance, I've been asking elected members from Nyanza that you've got a lake. I understand that lake has got some of the best fish in the world. But how come that fish is not sold in the European Union or in the international markets? Yet you've got Lake Victoria seated there, and then you've got an international airport. Okay. That fish doesn't go to the international markets. And you begin to wonder, why don't you have governors like Irungu Kangata, who are visionaries, who are forward-thinking, who can assist people in their community to think forward? Because when you talk about Kenya, it's not sufficient for an elected member of parliament, like the honorable member for Kibra, to say that his responsibility is legislation, representation, and oversight. You must make sure that those people, you uplift the economic lot. If you don't do that, then you have no business in the National Assembly.
That is a very pedestrian kind of thinking. That you only go to legislate, oversight, and you don't involve your people economically, don't help them develop. So we must really think about our people. And I just want to say that there is a very big correlation between transport and prices of commodities. When you have a faster transport, convenient transport, and easy transport, it will always lower the cost of commodities anytime, anywhere. You can imagine that you want to travel from Kisumu and you are taking 12 hours. And now you travel from Kisumu to Nairobi and you take 3 hours. It means that there is a reduction in terms of cost, even if it is commodities. And by the when we have this SGR, even currently, there is a move to have special economic zones, like in Kibosia and also in Busia. These economic zones will make sure that we even build factories around there so that we have products of those commodities being sold along the railway.
When will this happen?
Of course, the timelines for SGR, already there is mobilization of infrastructure in those areas, which has begun just by virtue of the pronunciation or beginning of this construction of SGR. So I think this is going to...
So it is more of with the construction of these, these economic zones, these factories, we're anticipating that with, them actively, working, then there will be demand for these, that will justify this extension. Because the question that is there, Honorable Borero, is what is the actual demand, for example, for cargo that, justifies the extension?
You want to say something?
You need to remember that we have landlocked neighbors. And they entirely rely on this corridor to be able to transport their goods. Trucks go all the way to Congo. So even before you begin talking about products that you're going to trade within yourselves, you have cargo that is moving from Mombasa to Uganda, Kigali, and Goma.
But again, we have to think of the residents and the people of where this particular extension is.
Yes, I'm coming to that. So the first bit is...
What should be the priority?
Both. You can't say, you need to prioritize both, because trade is imports and exports. Yeah, so you can't say you should be the priority. You want to only talk about what you cover. You're going to trade, but you need to look at it this way.
But the taxpayers are footing the cost.
Sorry,
the taxpayers are footing. So
yes, they're footing the cost, and because of that, they're going to get their money's worth in the sense that if you look at the way, let's take Kenya-EU trade for example, there's an active move to move this trade away from air freight because of the carbon miles. Because of that, they're trying to consider using shipping as a route. So all these products that go to the EU is one of the biggest trading partners for Kenya, accounting for over, I think, about 40% of trade that we do externally. So there's a possibility that we'll be able to pick up this product. And so instead of now, what we usually do at the moment is we transport these products from truck to ship, then talk all the way to Europe. But what if we change this scenario and say, we're going to put it on the rail, take it all the way to Mombasa, then we transport by cargo, by ship, all the way to Europe. Because, you know, nowadays we talk about avocado, we have the cost of transporting avocado is quite significant by air. Yeah? The cost of transporting horticultural products is quite significant. But now I think it's the Netherlands government that was introducing this in Kenya recently. They said that let's have a freight system where we do cold storage chains, then we transport by road and take them all the way to Mombasa and take them to Europe. But that's going to shift in the sense that instead of transporting by truck all the way to Mombasa, we're going to transport by rail, then get them to Mombasa and then take by ship all the way to Europe.
But the concern was here, Mr. Odari,
yes,
the fact that we probably do have these factories and these routes that this extension is passing through. So at the end of the day, if this particular project is going to pay itself, how can it pay itself if at all it is not utilized by the virtue of there not being factories that can produce goods that
factories.
Yes,
we may not have factories, but do we have agricultural products being exported out of the country? So let me give you
around the country, correct? But I'm talking about these routes.
Yes.
Okay.
So Naivasha, if you look at, you go to Kisumu, it's a growing area in terms of, I think even recently they opened up a cargo section for horticultural products in Kisumu, chilies and whatnot being exported out of the country in Kisumu, going by air, which is more expensive, which is going to be limited because of the EU CBAM regulations. So you just transport, instead of transporting by air, you do that by ship and you're able to meet your demand.
Let me come back to you, Honorable Borero, before I engage Mr. Leonard. There's the talk surrounding, Mr. Mokwa talked about the competitiveness of even the region in itself. But if you look at Ethiopia, for example, if you look at Tanzania, let me use Tanzania because Tanzania are very close neighbors. They did, construct their railway, which is actually electric, but cheaper. So talk about the value for money here.
Of course, it depends on how you look at it. And I know they constructed the Central Corridor. And you know the economy of Kenya and Tanzania, you cannot compare. Our economy and the Tanzanians' economy. And they are evolving. And I think the impact of that could be great in Tanzania, but because we are a bigger economy, if it were to be compared with Kenya, it could be negligible in terms of our economy. But I say, what the cost could have been cheaper, maybe than the Kenyan one. But what is the revenue collection? We can have high costs, but we have high revenue collection compared to our neighbors because our economy is about 10 times the economy of our neighbors. Even when we compare like Tanzania, the economy of Tanzania and Kenya is still not comparable. Even Uganda, even Rwanda, even Burundi. Burundi could be the economy of only Nairobi, even less. So that is not a good way to compare the cost of construction of that railways. But I must say that they did well to lower the cost of construction. But I do not know the circumstances surrounding the cost and the benefit of that SGR in Tanzania compared to the benefits of SGR in Kenya.
Mr. Odari, I'll come to you in a moment. Mr. Leonard, you talked about you being someone who, love numbers. Talk to us about the cost. As Honorable Orero says, our economy, our revenue is bigger than Tanzania, but at the end of the day, the cost of our standard gauge railway is far much higher compared to the cost of the, what Tanzania did construct. And on top of that, there is electric.
You remember when our SGR was first mooted, there was the question of land acquisition, because we had to build the new SGR on a separate corridor from the old meter gauge railway. And that corridor had to be procured from people who already owned the land. And the cost of land acquisition is vastly different from the cost of that which is in Tanzania. You know, Tanzania had this whole Ujamaa policy. I think everything was, they were a social country and everything. Land basically belonged to the state. And there wasn't this whole issue of private ownership, even if it's just leasehold or whatever arrangement it is. That's different in Kenya. Here, we've had to do compulsory acquisition, and it has had to be done at market rates. So that whole cost was now loaded onto the SGR. Then the other thing that we didn't do, and which Tanzania has done and has since learned that it did it the wrong way, is to electrify our railway line. You cannot electrify a railway line when you do not have adequate reserves of electricity. And that's a problem that Tanzania is currently facing, because sometimes you take that train, and for some reason or the other, the country suffers a national blackout, and the train is stuck in the middle of nowhere. At no point have you ever heard it mentioned that our SGR has been stuck in the middle of nowhere. It has, since inception, I stand to be corrected, but since inception, it has operated 100% efficiently. It runs on time, it's reliable, which is the essence of having a train, and it's cost effective.
There have been breakdowns, though. We have instances where there have been delays and, due to other technicalities.
But in terms of comparison, I mean, the frequency, I think, when you compare it with that of Tanzania, is negligible.
Okay.
It would be negligible.
Before you engage, Mr. Mokua, you talked about, freight and all. My question would be, what volume of freight is needed to break even here?
Actually, that's a good question, because I think, and the anecdotal evidence supports that this SGR, one of the reasons why the present one, as it is, which terminates in Naivasha, one of the reasons why it didn't break even is because the breaking even was predicated on it reaching Uganda. It has to be a whole system end to end, carrying goods and passengers, that makes it break even, because Uganda, as you realize, is one of our biggest trading partners. So it's not just it's not just freight going one way, say from the port city of Mombasa to Uganda and to DRC. Okay. There's also return freight. And without that return freight, the SGR cannot break even. So with that extension, now the SGR has, there's every possibility that the SGR will break even, and it will make sense in terms of cost.
Okay, Mr. Mokua, let me come to you. I saw you were taking some notes. But again, because of the issue that we talked about in regards to Uganda and all, the question would be, are we taking costs while the benefits would depend on something that is out of our control?
It actually depends on who you're having the conversation with. Like, for instance, there's some people who are saying that this new extension is a waste of time. And they're saying that it's going to terminate at Malaba, well, in fact, it's going to Malaba. So when you hear somebody making that kind of a conversation, then obviously they don't understand the subject. And in my view, Kenya, as the anchor state in the region, we must go the extra mile and do whatever is needed to make Kenya competitive. Because if we don't do this, then Tanzania is going to eat it, Tanzania is going to do it, and Tanzania will have our lunch. It's not as if there are these landlocked countries, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, DRC don't have options. They have options. They can go through many other countries, including South Sudan. So we must go the extra mile and ask ourselves, what do our neighbors expect from us? In fact, I would even volunteer and make a radical suggestion. That as part of the East African community, we must look at the state-owned enterprises that serve the region, and even get our neighbors to join their boards, or even some at a committee level. Like, for instance, the Kenya Ports Authority in Mombasa, it serves the entire region. Why can't we explore the possibilities of having somebody from Uganda, somebody from Rwanda, Burundi, and DRC, maybe joining the board, or setting up a special, maybe an advisory committee, because they're our consumers. So we cannot sit back. A few days ago, people are complaining, wait a minute, how come you have Tanzanians investing in Kenya? let's roll out the red carpet for anybody and everybody to come and invest in Kenya.
Okay.
Because right now we are complaining about job opportunities. How are you going to get your FDI?
I have two questions for you before I can engage Mr. Dari. You're saying let us roll out the red carpet for anybody who wants to come and invest in Kenya. The first question would be, at what cost? The second one would be, what are we gaining from them in this whole arrangement?
I mean, when you're talking about economic diplomacy, commercial diplomacy, having a foreign policy, for a country to grow, you must do three things. You must make sure that you get your FDI. If you don't get your FDI, this gentleman is an economist, he will tell you that it's a complete waste of time. And how do you get FDI? We're talking about taking advantage of globalization of marketing and production. If people are going to invest in Kenya, you must make it a low-cost region. So when an investor comes to Kenya, he says that if I'm going to set up a facility, say in Kisumu, how am I going to evacuate my cargo? Am I going to get trucks or I'm going to use a railway line? And the beautiful thing is now in Kisumu has got the three. You can use a road, you can use air, and you can use the railway line. So for me, whatever it takes, we must go the extra mile. But if we sit on our hands and say we are a big economy, that there are a few guys who are going to raise issues with that, before we know, the smallest economy in the region, Burundi, will sooner be bigger than us. In fact, for me, what should worry our policymakers is when President Museveni wakes up in the morning, what does he think about his cargo at the port of Mombasa? When President Kagame wakes up in the morning, what does he think about his cargo in Mombasa? How can we remove all the pain points so that it's a pleasurable thing? If we don't do that, then I mean, the Gen Zs have been complaining about employment opportunities. How are you going to create employment opportunities in Kenya if you don't bring FDI? And there's another issue that Leonard has tiptoed. Part of the reason why SGR has become very expensive in Kenya is because of cartels and vendors. I recall not a long time ago, then President Kenyatta had a news conference in Mombasa, I think at the end of the year, where he promised to make public the contract.
Exactly.
Kenyans are still waiting for that. And another thing when you talk about...
Even for the phase one of the SGR, the then President Uhuru Kenyatta promised to make those contracts public. The sitting president, President William Ruto, also promised to make those contracts public. But nothing has been made.
Now, that should worry you as to why is it being treated as a... Is it a state secret in Kenya or in China, or is there something that they don't want Murad to access? That is number one. Number two, again, Kenya has got some people who describe themselves as very clever speculators. They knew a long time ago how this SGR is going to be structured, and they went and bought land. So even when you want to do the compulsory acquisition, they inflate the prices. You recall a few guys were taken to court from the National Land Commission. You know, they're working in cahoots with the cartels. So that if a piece of land, say, a certain unit is supposed to go maybe for 10,000 bob, all of a sudden it's going for 1 million bob.
But who are these cartels?
When President Ruto was campaigning, he promised to dismantle cartels and special interest groups. And he also spoke about state capture. And Kenyans are waiting to see whether these cartels are actually human beings or they're strange animals. And the member for Kibera, because he's he's a member of the National Assembly. So when I come from Kitucha South, he represents my interest. He must tell us whether there's actually going to be a state capture commission, whether they've identified these cartels, whether they've identified these special interest groups.
Okay, it's almost 15 months or so to the next general election, but we're still waiting for these cartels to be made public, for the issue of cartels to be solved. So does it mean
I take a slightly different view?
Okay.
I take a slightly different view.
Okay.
I think, first of all, there's this, I don't agree with there's this obsession with FDI that, we need to attract investment, we need to get investors outside there. Look, if we can be able to mobilize our own domestic resources, we can have investors working in these spaces, being able to invest in our own spaces. So I think it's important to have FDI, but let's not make it this very important thing that we need to really aspire to, because time and again it has proved we sign agreements, we try to get investors, but they don't come. And even if they come, the capital accumulation, the surplus value generated from the trade they do is externalized because they're able to take that resource outside. But now, coming to the issue of speculation, I think we have a problem, we have to admit. And you were saying about value for money for the SGR. If you look at what Ethiopia did, Ethiopia took their SGR through mountains, a mountainous region, a much longer route, but it was cheaper than what we paid for. Okay. And it's because of speculation. You know, we are terrible speculators. I mean, I know of a story, we were doing some research on it, that there's a gentleman who was at the coast where the railway was supposed to pass through his land. He was given money. This gentleman went to Maldives and left the family destitute. You know, he's never seen that kind of money before. He doesn't even imagine he's been able to see that kind of money. So he takes the money, he goes to Maldives, then after the money is finished, that's when he comes back and leaves, oh, let's continue with the family. And even another gentleman was there. He went and took a two-roomed hotel in Voi. So he says all visitors who want to see him, he's now become important. They should come and report to him. Okay. His meeting. The kind of speculation we have is terrible. And because of that, the cost of land is, you know, it trebles. And because of that, then you find the cost of this infrastructure projects going up. And it's the same thing with what has happened with LAPSET. Because, let me just finish. Uganda, at some point, Total was considering passing their pipeline through Kenya. Okay. But what did we do? We had speculated so much in the northern corridor, they said, you know what? It is better to take the pipeline through Tanzania, and we lost it. Let
us take the bull by the horns here. Mr. Dismas has talked about cartels. We've talked about cartels. But the question is, the layman out there listens to, you know, cartels, left, right, and center. But who are these cartels? Are these people within government? Because when you talk about cartels, when the president talks about dismantling cartels, but at the end of the day, like Mr. Mokua said, he said when he takes over power, you know, we'll dismantle cartels. But we're still talking about cartels 3 years into his administration.
It's called crony capitalism. That's crony capitalism, where you have a very incestuous and close relationship between people in government and people in the private sector, and decisions are made to favor the private sector by people in the public sector. Yes. Okay. So as long as we have that relation, you know, and that's the thing that he was talking about in terms of how do we dismantle cartels. As long as we have crony capitalism as the epitome of how we operate our government, that's going to be problematic for the long time to come.
Okay, Mr. Yoro, let me come back to you. Again, on the issue of, you know, we've all talked about this being a project that will benefit Kenyans, isn't it? But the concern is here, at the end of the day, if we don't have the infrastructures, we don't have the factories in place, we don't have, you know, what is needed for Kenyans to benefit. Kenyans are the lower tier of life to benefit. Then at the end of the day, will this project really benefit Kenyans, or just the, you know, top elite, the businessmen and women, those who've been contracted to you know, engage in business in this project?
I think that is what I say, that what is the alternative if we don't carry it? And we must always start, one thing leads to another. Even if we were to build a factory before the SGR, we would have still brought the SGR. But in this respect, we have started with the SGR, and it is going to open the area.
Why not the factories first, Mr. Herrero?
That is what we are saying, that one will always lead to the other. Even if we have started with the SGR and we still build the factories, we are not saying that...
Realistically, which one should have started?
Of course, what I must say, let me say this. To open up an area, to develop a country, the first thing is infrastructure. And infrastructure, okay, even factories are infrastructure, but road communication is the most important aspect of development. If you don't start with the transport system, and you start with the factory, imagine you have factories and the goods cannot be transported. What will happen?
So my question would be, my question would be, just a moment, my question would be, Honorable Herrero.
Yes.
So if today the railway passes through Kibos, for example, and the people of Kibos, there's no factory, there's no nothing, how will they benefit?
Of course, where it is passing, if you go to Kibos, that is
just an example.
Sugar cane. But now we are talking of a reality where it is going to pass. It's not.
There are other areas where it will pass.
It's not an example where we lack what to say about the economy. You know, in Western Kenya, we have Moroni, we have Mumias, we have Chemelil, and we have those. That is just a small area, and we are saying that we are going to have economic zone around Kibos. That is just around Kibos only. And as we move towards Western Kenya. We have many other products that we are talking about. We are talking of avocados. We are also talking of the fish next to the lake that we can also have. So we are not talking of things that we don't have in this country. So what we are saying is that this infrastructure, that is the SGR, is really going to have economic regions and special economic zones that will spur economic development in this country.
I take a slightly, just a minute.
Okay, because I'm to engage Mr.
Yes, just a slightly different view from Mheshimiwa.
Okay.
We must have productive capacity first, then we expand the market, then we build the infrastructure.
Exactly.
So to an extent, then I'll concede that we've made some technical errors here and there. Because even if you look at the way the SFT is being done, you need to have, because you'll open up a market and you have nothing to trade to begin with.
And then
you're opening a market for foreigners. So to that extent, I concede that yes, it could have been done better, but then it's not all lost because we still have a market to trade. Kenya has a big market in Uganda. At some point, Uganda was one of the biggest trading partners for Kenya. So if you can be able to harness that and take these products into the region, DRC is a whole big market in the region that is consuming a lot of food. They have no productive capacity there. So these are things you can be able to take over time.
But we are saying that this SGR is passing from Mombasa Maritime Airport, Port Authority, through all these to our locked countries. It is not just about Kenya alone. It's also about exporting to other countries which are landlocked. We have Burundi landlocked, we have Rwanda.
Mr. We are talking so much about other countries. We're not talking about what we benefit as a country. We're talking about other countries.
We are saying that is an added advantage.
What is in store for us?
That is what I'm saying.
What is in store for Kenyans?
But that is trade.
It's trade.
It is trade.
You missed the point. That's trade.
Okay.
Yeah. But look at it this way.
Okay.
Those of us old enough who've lived in this city long enough, remember Thika Road, when it was a couple of lanes on either side before the Thika Superhighway came. Nobody wanted to live on Thika Road. Nobody wanted to do business on Thika Road until that bit of infrastructure came called the Thika Superhighway. Then all of a sudden, Thika Road opened up. Everyone wanted to build there. Everyone wanted to do business there, to the extent that the road became impassable. I think after Thika, it became as difficult as the Eldoret-Nakuru highway. What changed? What was the game changer? Infrastructure. I was in Bahrain many years ago when it was just a dump in the desert. And I saw them put up infrastructure. They put up shopping malls, they put up roads, beautiful roads, and it was like a ghost city. There was nothing happening there. I mean, we were a couple of friends walking through the streets of Bahrain, and we were the only people walking on the streets. If you go to Bahrain today, it's a totally different story. Look at Dubai. Dubai was also another spot in the desert. It was nothing. But infrastructure has converted it into what it is today. So the point is, when you look at SGR and say, oh, there are no industries that are going to support it, or the industry should have come first, it's the wrong way of looking at it. Put up the infrastructure, development naturally follows. I can actually see very easily that there'll be a lot of floriculture, because that whole area, all the way Kisumu, Eldoret, wherever, it will be very easy to transport flowers by
then
train.
Are we being realistic or are we being optimistic?
We are being very realistic. There are people who are planting coffee in Bungoma. There are people who are planting coffee in Cherangani. There are people who are doing avocados on that side of the country. These are export crops. They are already being done as we speak at the moment, and they are transported by road. SGR will reduce the cost of freight. Let me give you figures again. I told you I'm a numbers person.
Okay.
The cost of, I talked to people in Unga Limited, and they transport quite a bit of their, those Unga, the production of their Unga by train. And they tell me that the cost of transporting that product by train is 17 times cheaper than transporting by road. So think of the benefits in that way. You're transporting your flowers, your avocado, everything, then you become competitive.
Okay.
The profits come back to you in terms of the savings that you make.
The other question would be, before I engage Mr. Makura, you've talked about, horticulture and all, but the concern is, all this, to some extent, has to be done, in large scale. The question would be, Has the government probably, looked at empowering the people from these regions to ensure that when they venture into horticulture, for example, it has to be large scale? Have they been empowered? Do they, understand all that?
The empowering that they need is infrastructure. Capital will follow naturally. There are large tracts of land that are undeveloped, and they're just sitting there waiting for infrastructure to connect and for produce to follow thereafter. So it's not a question of the government holding classes and teaching people, running agricultural extension services like in the 70s. We have the know-how. The know-how is there. As we've talked about FDI here, FDI will follow. There'll be people who will see potential once infrastructure is in place.
We talk about...
And one of the attractants of FDI is the presence of infrastructure. Once it is in place, even that piece of land that you consider dead capital in the countryside will become attractive to some foreigner who will come and give you the know-how, transfer the knowledge to you in good time.
You're painting a very beautiful picture of, all this will develop, all this will happen, but when is the question?
It's a function of time.
Let me answer the...
It's a function of time. Because as long as it takes, what we want to know is that in, say, 5 years, 6, 7, 10 years, we should be able to see the benefits of the SGR, the special economic zones that will come up there, the production that will be enhanced. It's a function of time. So 10 years.
If you talk about 10 years, 5, 10 years, what happens in between?
Well, I mean, railway infrastructure is built to last 2 generations. So, 5, 10 years is actually nothing. It's a relatively short time. Because if we are building it to last the future generations, people who come in, who come after us, 10 years, 10 years is a relatively short time. In between is now putting the nitty-gritties.
But again, you have to factor in. You talk about 5 years, 10 years, and it's okay. But you have to factor in the time that, for example, we have to repay the loan that we have taken to undertake this infrastructure, isn't it?
By law, Mheshimiwa will tell you that by law, payment of a project of this sort.
And somebody talks about 2029.
Yes. For the payment of a project of this sort, usually ought to be covered by the generations that benefit from it. So if we are going to benefit, if it's only our generation going to benefit from it up to 2029, then we are the ones who will carry the burden of repayment. But if the burden of repayment is going to be spilled over to the next generation, then they'll also be beneficiaries and they'll take their part of repayment.
Mr. Makuyo.
Yeah. I mean, when Mheshimiwa was talking about some of the products, and first of all, speaking as a member of the Kisii community, we need this SGR Ipitiapo or Kisii or Nyamira so that we benefit from it in a great number.
And by the way, talking about Kisii, talking about where you come from, there were concerns from the residents of Nyamira County that there's no station within Nyamira, despite the fact that there was a very beautiful talk about from even their own members of parliament on social media that there will be a station in Nyamira. I think there's a mention of Ikonge, if I'm not wrong, but from the the maps provided by Kenya Railways, there's no such station in that place. And there are concerns from residents of that area.
Yeah, it's very urgent for the authorities concerned to make sure that there's a station for several reasons. Number one, there's a lot of tea and coffee and bananas from Kisii. And by the way, if you ever go to Kisii, there's a place called Keumbu, you'll actually shed tears. Because right now, poor women, in the morning they harvested the avocados, bananas, so many fruits. In the evening, they're forced to sell it at a throwaway price. So you may get a big avocado, which ordinarily in Nairobi should be selling maybe for 100 bob, but in the evening you buy one for 10 bob, and then because the poor lady has to carry the cargo back home, and akumwambia kijana yangu go with this, you are given everything. Now, when you have this railway line there, then it will mop up all these products, they come to Nairobi. Now, that appears to be very basic, that it's not a large scale, but imagine that almost every household has got these bananas, has got these fruits, but there's no market. Do you know in Kisii, you cannot sell a banana to anybody because everybody has got a banana. So why should I buy a banana from you if everybody has got a banana? But there's a market in Nairobi, there's a market in Mombasa, and you may not be alive to the fact that Kisii bananas and sweet potatoes from Kisii are probably the best in the world. So we'll get them from Kisii and place them in Mombasa for the tourists to come and enjoy. Now, this railway line has got something else that outside being an enabler.
Do you farm bananas by any chance, Mr. McCoy?
I do. But with this thing now,
So
maybe I've got a few trees.
You also benefit from the SGR?
Yes, and I'm going to be now a big-time farmer. Now, with this kind of thing, it's going to be an enabler, and there's a huge multiplier effect. Can you just imagine wherever it stops? There's a lady who will start selling tea and coffee. Mm-hmm. You know, that is creating opportunities. Now, Leonard spoke about the Thika Superhighway. Do you know that before the road was done, and even serious thinkers were asking, why would you want to upgrade Thika Highway instead of making sure that this critical artery from Mombasa to Malaba has been upgraded first? You know, the cost of land along Thika Highway, Superhighway, it shot, it went to the rafters simply because of this infrastructure. Now, there are a number of people who want to have a wet blanket on this project simply because for the longest time since independence, Western Kenya has been marginalized. So a number of people are complaining about this thing. I told you earlier on, they don't know the difference between Malaba and Malava. So for us from Western Kenya, even if it's going to be a white elephant, just have it there. Our kids will wake up in the morning, they go charge the railway line, they go back at home. But meanwhile... wait.
You cannot say it will be
No, I'm saying, meanwhile...
Taxpayers' money will have been spent.
I mean, those people, but have you not come across a report from KRA that the highest concentration of taxpayers, the biggest potential is actually in Western Kenya? Do you think President Museveni is a madman to come and witness the launch of this thing if there's no economic value? That the Rwandese are waiting for this thing, Burundi, DRC. This thing is going to be huge. And even if it's going to be a white elephant, we have so many white elephants in Kenya, let Western Kenya have a white elephant of its own. Let's have our share.
My question, you know, it could be funny and all, but my question would be, you're talking about if it will be a white elephant, then let Western Kenya have a white elephant of their own. I mean, is that the thinking that should be encouraging?
No, of course that was on a light note.
This is money.
No, of course it's on a light note.
But for the Kenyan out there, it is not really on a light note.
It's on a light note. There is no way it can ever be a white elephant because already you are doing big business with Uganda. And the president of Uganda has come in person. In person. He did not send anybody. He came in person as a statement to confirm that he cannot wait for this. And he said it's going to reduce the cost of doing business in Uganda. It's going to reduce the cost of transportation in Uganda.
But this is Africa. We used to, you know, all talk but nothing. That is why my concern was, what if there's delay?
It's being done concurrently. It's being done concurrently. You see, it's a good thing you're saying.
Yes.
There's delay.
Is that concern?
It's being done concurrently. So at the same time that Kenya is investing towards taking the railway to Malaba, Uganda is investing taking it to Kigali, taking it to the border with Rwanda.
And that is completely okay. But in case there's
both
a delay,
have been financed.
What happens?
So what are you looking at? Both have been financed. Yeah? Both have been financed. Both are starting at this time. So I don't know what fear you have that is going to happen in the next...
You see, my concern is,
Yes.
Just a moment, Mr. Orari, my concern is, I mean, we know what happens here in the country.
Yes.
Yes. It could be financed, but at some point, there's no money. Because some, probably individuals somewhere, both of you talked about cartels and all.
Yes.
Yes.
So, yes, that's a possibility. But currently we have, I mean, look, it's been, I know there'll be some sort of speculation where maybe the cost will be overrun and something like that. But still, it's important to have this infrastructure going all the way because at the end of the day, you need infrastructure that can be able to open up the hinterland from what has happened all these years before.
And also, briefly, South Sudan must engage in international trade. Uganda must engage in international trade. Rwanda must engage in international trade. Burundi, DRC, and all of them, even if our neighboring countries don't fulfill their part of the deal, all their cargo will land at somewhere in Malaba, and this facility, SGR, will evacuate the cargo to Mombasa. So whether or not they keep their side of the bargain is not material in the conversation. We'll need it. And even Kenyans will still need this facility. Even assuming that there are no goods, there's no freight, but there'll be heavy passenger traffic Every person. Do you know an average person in Kisii doesn't know the meaning of a railway line? So there'll be traffic.
Well, you see, just a moment, Honorable Orero. Whatever you're talking about, Mr. Mokua, it could be true. But let's use the example of phase 1 of the SGR. And I'll go back again to the figures. We generated 21.3 billion from SGR last year, despite growth in terms of cargo and passengers. That is compared to the 129 billion that we pay annually in terms of servicing our debt, most of which to the Chinese government, by the way, most of it which is from the railway project.
Now, part of the reason why that contract,
the freight and the cargo and all that will help service the debt. So if you don't have it, how do we service this debt?
Part of the reason why this contract remains hidden somewhere is because of vendor interests, or maybe there were special interests, or there were cartels that made the cost uncompetitive. However, it does not mean that there is no cargo to be transported. It does not mean that there are no passengers. I understand from people who want to use the Makadara, the rail line from Nairobi to Mombasa, at some stage you can't even get a seat. You need to book for days before, or even months before you get a seat.
Okay, so just to add on to that, we are using 16% capacity for cargo. Because the railway lands somewhere in Suswa. If it goes all the way to Malaba, assuming we even get to 40%, because the targeted rate was 48%, that's good enough to be able to pay some of this.
I also want to say that, this railway SGR is going to be self-funding, most of it, because this levy that we get from railway development levy, we collect about 35 billion.
I think it's...
And it is going to be...
It's also... I was looking at it, and it's around 40 to 50 billion.
Yeah, it's going to be used as collateral, as the seed money. So instead of borrowing from a high interest rate, some of this money is going to be self-funding. So we are not going to have the kind of debts that we are talking about. And we are saying that this levy is going to be securitized, and it is going to be used to fund this.
But somebody talked about, getting some loan from China Exim Bank.
Of course, that is just to help self-sustain this. But we have a collateral seed money that is going to be used to start this.
Okay, let me engage Mr. Leonard. Mr. Leonard, let's talk about the railway development levy. And then from the statistics that I got as going through all this, we collect around 40 to 50 billion annually from the railway development levy. But there's one concern. In the course of this process, or the development of this particular project, are there maybe concerns that the railway development levy might be raised to help finance this project?
I don't think so, because Kenyans are rather touchy about raising of any taxes and levies, and that railway development levy is a component of the price at the pump, your petrol price at the pump. So Kenyans are a bit touchy about any taxes being raised, and CS Mbadi has actually indicated that in the short term, no taxes will be raised. So I doubt it's going to be raised.
But we've had those tests.
But we've signed, to add on to that, we've signed international agreements where the railway development levy has been capped at 2.5%. So if you have an international agreement where you've already committed to that, actually the most you can do is dismantle those tariffs, not increase them. Yeah?
Mr. Orero, let me ask you, Honorable Orero, because of the four gentlemen, you're a politician. Some argue that this project rather makes more sense, politically speaking, ahead of 2027.
Now that you have called me a politician,
you're a politician, Honorable Orero.
It could be right or not. Of course, as a politician, one of the things that we invest in is about perception. That is now talking as a politician. So if it can create a perception that can sway for you the votes, why not? But in reality, we have discussed that it is a viable project. It is a project that is going to raise the economic status of the Western people and Kenya at large. It is a project that is going to create special economic zones. It is a project that is going to develop certain parts of the countries which have been neglected. But as a politician, why not?
Let me ask you, let me take you back, because now that you've said, as a politician, why not? If it makes a lot of sense, politically speaking, could that be the reason as to why we've, like Mr. Odari was saying, we've started with the railway instead of the infrastructure first? Because, you know, when you look at time, 2027 is fast approaching, so it would make more sense politically to have the railway in place ahead of 2027 as opposed to starting with infrastructure, other infrastructure first.
I think I was very categorical, implicit, and explained myself on the same matter that I said in our policies as ODM political party. One of our pillars was the improvement of infrastructure. And that we explained very, very vividly to the people. And it made, as it was one of our policy framework dwelt on infrastructure.
Okay.
I will not retract that this SGR is going to open up this. It's not for political reason. This is something that was in our manifesto, even as a political party, as ODM political party. It was in our manifesto. And if we had formed the government, we would have done the same. I think even in the former government, they had also wanted to do this, but I think they stopped on the way. Maybe because either of political reasons or because of convenience.
Okay.
But I think what must go out there that it is unnecessary development that Kenyans will not relate about.
Sometimes economics pushes politics. There's no problem.
So I mean, from where you said, my question suffices, because do you think that is part of the motivation as to why we are speeding up this railway, to have it in place before other infrastructure, because 2027 is fast approaching?
I mean, if a politician will be motivated to do the right thing because of politics, where's the harm?
It's okay to do the right thing, but is it the right, has the right process been followed to ensure that we maximize on the benefits?
I think we're on the right track.
You think
I think so. With the railway, we're on the right track.
Okay.
I may not agree with everything else, but I'm on the railway. It's fine.
I know Mr. Moko is itching to say something because I know he loves politics and all.
Yeah, because, you know, Western Kenya has been starved of infrastructure right from 1963. So whether it's a political decision targeting 2027, Mura, Anyango, and Nafula do not care.
They like it.
All they want to do is to see that railway line. All they want to see are roads. All they want to see are these international airports, so that all of them stop, you know, coming to Nairobi in truckloads. There are, if you want to see JKI, there's one in Kisii, there's one in Kisumu. If you want to see the railway line, it's there. So that we're using your small piece of land, which is extremely productive, highly productive. You can grow your sweet bananas, avocados, and you know, with these cold chain facilities, there's a huge market for it. I've tried to paint a picture which has escaped your mind. Just imagine a lady. In the morning, she goes to her farm, and early in the morning, 5 o'clock, harvests about, say, 50 avocados. And then she's only able to sell 5, 10%. 90% goes to waste because everybody else has got these avocados, everybody else has got a banana. But with these infrastructure facilities coming up, some clever middlemen will come up and do aggregation or even get these outgrowers, and then sell these products to the international market. So that is what people are looking for. So if it's a political decision reflecting the new thinking at the National Treasury, where you ensure that there is equity and equality in the distribution of national resources, it's okay. If there are people who are unhappy with this new policy at the National Treasury as being executed by Mbadi, we wish them well. Now, number 2, you cannot invest resources in promoting Kenya, and I know Edgar will have issues with this. You cannot invest resources in promoting Kenya as an FDI destination, and the cost of transport in Kenya is very high. Actually, another thing that and I hope Mheshimiwa is going to look at this, is the cost of energy. Because, I mean, you'll be surprised to learn that a number of people have relocated from Kenya and have gone to Egypt to produce fast-moving consumer goods. Egypt or Zimbabwe. Can you imagine Zimbabwe? So they've gone to Zimbabwe. Why? Because of the cost of production in Kenya makes us uncompetitive. So this SGR is part of our strategy to make us competitive. And now the next thing, again, if it's going to be for political reasons, for 2027, there's another animal called independent power generators. We also want to find out where is this animal domiciled and why is the cost of power in Kenya very high compared to our neighbors.
Okay, gentlemen, we're running out of time. I'll give each one of you 2 minutes to give me your final submissions, starting with you, Mr. Leonard. And my question in regards to that would be, we've done this project before. From where you sit, what did we get wrong? And are we correcting that mistake with this second phase, or are we scaling it? In under 2 minutes, kindly.
Okay, like I said earlier, I think we got our act wrong when it came to land acquisition because there were speculators that jumped on board and made the entire process extremely expensive. Then we also had opacity when it came to the loan agreement. It was not public. And anecdotal evidence again suggests that we procured that loan rather expensively. But where we are getting it right, again, as I've mentioned, is the fact that John Mbadi has become very creative about our funding. 30% being coming from the securitization of the railway development levy, and another portion of it coming, I think, from panda bonds that have been suggested, which are cheaper than Eurobond because they are in yuan, the Chinese currency. My final statement I want to say is that we should avoid, one of the mistakes that we make is the tendency to see if infrastructure in terms of profit and loss rather than assets, state assets that are national, rather than seeing them as national security assets. And an example, a case in point is Kenya Airways. Today they announced their results. They were not that pleasing because they made a net loss. But the important and the critical thing to get from those results is that the business is viable because the top line has grown. With time, it will be viable. And to look at Kenya Airways as a critical national asset that must be supported because of the benefits that go beyond the balance sheet, that go beyond just mere profit and loss. So in the same way, that's the way we ought to look at the railway.
Okay, Mr. Mukua.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I'm a disciple of a subject called meritocracy. And Kenyans tend to forget meritocracy, which is anchored in capacity, competence, and character when you are going for the votes. You know, we are 1 times above number as you approach elections. That some people have offered themselves for election. They score an A in impunity, mediocrity, and corruption, and you reward them. You remember, not long ago, we were told that a number of people who offered themselves for National Assembly were kings of wash-wash. And we expect them to pass legislation around money laundering. We'll get it wrong. So all this infrastructure we are doing will actually count for zero if we don't get the right people at the National Assembly, at the Senate, in all elective positions. That is number one. Okay. You've been talking about this SGR as if it's going to be a failure, or you're casting your doubts.
But mine is to pose questions. Because this, these are questions being asked by Kenyans.
Yeah, so I want to give a live example. We had the Chinese vice president visiting Kenya. I'm unable to pronounce his name, but he flagged off agricultural products using SGR to China on zero tariff. You've got the Mozambique president in Kenya coming to see how we can catalyze trade and investments between our country. Musalia Mudavadi has been promoting Kenya as an FDI destination, talking about this commercial and economic diplomacy. All of these things should crystallize into one thing: wealth creation and employment creation for all Kenyans. Okay. If we don't do that, and if we don't be sure that Mheshimiwa has got the right company at the National Assembly, then we'll talk about this till the cows come home.
Fair enough. Honorable Rero.
I think most Kenyans, we believe that any project that we do, we must borrow money with very high interest rates. But under the Miscellaneous Fees and Levy Amendment Act of 2026, which was signed just this month, 90% of railway development levy will be used as a collateral for this SGR. So that's about 35 billion. This is going to ease our burden. And not all the money that we are going to use will be borrowed for, we will have external borrowing. So I think this will alleviate the fears of most Kenyans that the payment period of this is going to be very long. I think it is going to be shorter than usual. And I know that this SGR is going to improve the economic status of most people, not just from Western Kenya, but anybody along the railway line. The economic activities in these areas will be booming. But before I leave, I want to thank my colleague here for having very kind words for me.
The question is he a voter?
He's a member of the public And I've really expressed his satisfaction on the kind of work that we do in Kibra, and we support the people of Kibra.
Of course, we love to listen to the people of Kibra.
You've actually done very well.
Fair enough.
Okay, I think we got some issues wrong in the first phase of the railway, and we have learned from those lessons. And for me, the payoff for having the railway extend all the way to Malaba is better than anything else you'll have. It's better than leaving that thing in the middle of Suswa there. So I would say, yes, we've learned our lessons. If you look at the way they're recalibrating the issues, there are some lessons that have been taken in from the past. And I would say, let that railway get to Malaba. Because, I mean, why else do we want to leave it in the bush? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ojari. Thank you very much, Honorable Rero, Mr. Leonard, and Mr. Dismas Mokua. I almost called you Didmas. Maybe you want to go that way. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for making time to be with us. Of course, that was the conversation in regards to the extension of the SGR to Kisumu and Malaba. Thank you very much for making time to be with us. To the entire team that made this a success and possible, many thanks. Do have yourself a wonderful night. Until next time, and like always, God bless.